Welcome and happy Friday, everyone. We're just giving it a moment or two for our vodcast community to get settled into this learning space. We have been expecting you as we do every week around this hour, and we're super excited to be in community with each of you as we learn with and from each other. I am Dr. Nika White. My pronouns are she, her, and I invite you to go to the chat and let us know where you are joining the conversation from today. It is always a treat for us to see the different geographies that are represented. And we also want to give a special shout out to those who are maybe catching today's episode through LinkedIn Live. Many will register to be a part of our Zoom community, but then others will also just catch the show on LinkedIn Live, whatever capacity that you're joining us today. We are so grateful to have you here, and we appreciate you finding it of value to be here joined with us today. And if you also desire to connect with this community beyond this hour of time, then go to the chat and share your LinkedIn information. That lets us know that we can reach out and be connected in that social platform. And I will also share my LinkedIn information into the chat. If I am not already connected to you, I would love the opportunity to be in community on LinkedIn. So definitely make sure that you check that out. I also want to let you know that Intentional Conversations is something that we've been doing now for almost 5 years. It'll be 5 years in April of 2025. And this is our way of just providing ways for the broader community to deepen their understanding and knowledge of all things: diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, justice, right? All the things that fall under that broad umbrella. And so it is about intersecting DEI with leadership and business. And we are so excited to welcome a wonderful guest co-host today that I look forward to you having a chance to interacting with. Once again, welcome to Intentional Conversations VodCast, and I hope you enjoy today's show. Let the conversations begin, indeed, and that is precisely what we are about to do. If you are just tuning in, you have joined Intentional Conversations VodCast, and I am Dr. Nika White. I want to encourage you all to vote. If you haven't already, make sure you are planning your voting strategy. My family voted early this week, and it was liberating to be able to go and vote. And so we're not gonna talk about who you should vote for, but I want you to just make sure you go to the polls and take someone with you. We're roughly about 10 or 11 days out, and so I think it's critically important for us to keep the momentum up to make sure that everyone is leveraging their voice with the vote. I also want to let you know that here at NWC, we value disability inclusion. And in that regard, we do have the closed caption that has been enabled for those who may value and gain benefit. If that can enhance your experience, then know that it has been enabled for you. Now, one of the things that we like to do here at NWC at the start of our vodcast is just to share some of the national observances that are going on. And October is not at all at a shortage of observances. So I will tell you that while we will touch on a few today, sometimes we'll switch it up from week to week because there's so many. We literally could be here all day talking about those observances. But the first one that I'll share is October is Global Diversity Awareness Month. And so we have to make sure that we're leaning into all the different ways that dimensions of diversity show up, not just here in the United States, but all over the world. I also want you to know that October is National Disability Employment Awareness Month. And so we have to realize that disabilities come both visible and invisible. And that community of individuals certainly deserve to be able to be gainfully employed. There's a lot of great talent that they can contribute to our society. So make sure that you're doing what you can to advocate for people with disabilities. I also want to remind you, because we're in this high stakes election season, that there are some tools out there for you by way of my 4th LinkedIn Learning course, which is all about addressing hate speech in the workplace. So if you're looking for a way to upskill colleagues around civil discourse, especially during this time where conversations can be very delicate, I encourage you to check out my LinkedIn Learning course and share it out with someone else if you think that will be of value to them as well. Now, at NWC, we show up to our community by providing lots of different complimentary services. And one of the ways in which we do so outside of Intentional Conversations podcast is we release every single week new video content. There's short clips called Inclusion Uncomplicated, and they're just messages to help simplify DEI. The recent one that we just released is actually about increasing buy-in from leadership, a topic that I know is top of mind for so many different people. So if you're interested in that, why don't you scan that QR code? Or if you want to have access to the archive of all of our Inclusion Uncomplicated videos, then you can check that out by subscribing to our YouTube channel. We are now booking for Intentional Conversations co-hosts for 2025. We do have some that are already on the books for Q1. We're rounding that out right now. So if you have someone in your network that you think would add great value to our community, let us know. We would love to be able to be in touch with them and have a conversation. You can do so simply by sending an email to my colleague, Amora Carter, at amora@nikawhite.com. She handles our vetting, our bookings, and would love to be in touch with any of you with those recommendations. Now, I just want you to know that as we work towards the future weeks ahead, Intentional Conversations, we are going to be having Wade Hinton. He is returning as a guest on our podcast, and that's going to be on November 1st, so he'll be kicking us off. And in that intentional conversation, he is going to discuss polarization in the workplace. He also has a new ebook out, and we will be unpacking some of the content that's found in that resource. And so I hope you will join us on Friday, November the 1st. Now, we're at that point in time where it gives me great pleasure to be able to provide a formal introduction of today's guest co-host. And if you've been with us for quite some time, you know the way in which I like to do that is to read the person's bio. I think it's important for all of us to be able to understand the accolades, the credibility, credentials, and experiences in which our guest co-hosts show up to the conversation with. And so today will be no different in terms of me providing you with that information. I'm so excited today to welcome Rochelle Younan-Montgomery, and she is the founder and CEO of R.E.S.E.T, a published author. We'll talk about that book today, Racial Justice at Work, keynote speaker, and expert facilitator specializing in compassionate leadership and creating cultures of belonging. She empowers leaders to shift from burnout to balance. Burnout's such a big topic right now, using a human-centered approach to foster genuine connection and thriving team dynamics. You know what to do now, podcast community. As I stop sharing my screen, find those accolades, those emojis, those reactions, words of affirmation, whatever it is, while I add Rochelle to the spotlight. But let us do our job in helping her to feel welcomed for sharing with our community today. And before I release you, Rochelle, to actually greet this community in your own way, we have a tradition here on Intentional Conversations VodCast. And by the way, my shirt says Intentional Inclusionist, for those of you who know that as part of my brand. But we very intentionally like to lead off with our guest co-host sharing with us something about themselves that we would not know from reading their bio, which we just did, or looking at their LinkedIn profile. So welcome. From Minneapolis, welcome. Thank you for being here. And feel free to share with us your fun fact or interesting fact to help us get to know you just a little bit better.
Great. Thank you for the warm welcome. It's so good to be here. I'm so excited for this conversation. There's a lot of things. I am a mother of two young daughters. I have a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old. Let's see. I can do a backflip on the trampoline, and I'm very proud of that. I think play is such a critical aspect of my life to be sustained in this work, really grounding into joy and spontaneity. And so, yeah, so those are just a few fun facts.
No, I love that. And of course, I amplified the need and the encouragement for people to go and vote. And so I can't help but to ask this question, Rochelle. Having two young daughters, again, I don't know what political, thoughts and attachments maybe that you have, but I do want to ask, when you think about our who's in the running now for leader of the United States, and you have two young girls, just share some reflections of maybe how you've been having conversations with your young daughters. I think you said 3 and 7. Maybe the 7-year-old is a bit more able to engage than the 3-year-old. But what are you sharing, if anything, that just can help them to understand the magnitude of this moment?
Hmm. Yeah, I love that question. It's complicated to respond in a way that's developmentally aligned with my oldest's like understanding and concept of
Sure.
right and wrong, good and bad. And the media
Yeah.
is so we are so binary and are thinking about bad guy, good guy sort of language. And so probably to a fault, I spend a lot of time in the nuance and in the in between, explaining like, you know what, there are people who make bad choices. And I really try to reframe that language of like this person is good or bad and more about the choices they're making is having impact on people. And I'm honest. I don't hold back when it comes to what that impact has been, but I really focus on, okay, what developmentally will make sense for a 7-year-old? And where does that and where can we find hope and be excited for the possibility
Yeah.
to um
I love that.
yeah.
Yeah, hope and be excited. So I asked that question because there's a lot of different ways in which parents are trying to expose, introduce, educate their kids on the historic nature of all that's entailed around this current moment. Within the political process. And what I'm hearing a lot of parents, especially of young girls, say is that I am taking my young kids with me to the voting polls, right? Because I want them to see that I am doing my civic duty. And it creates this opportunity to engage in some level of dialogue that, can be varied in terms of the appropriateness based upon the age of those kids. But I just love that people are finding intentional ways of bringing their children into the process, especially for a lot of the families that have young brown and black daughters. And so I just wanted to kind of lean into that for a second. Okay, so
I
let's
have one
jump,
more. May I add to that briefly?
please,
So
please.
I live in Minneapolis and we live 4 blocks from where George Floyd was murdered. And this happened when Maya was what, 4, I think.
Okay.
But we were in the thick of the protests of, and we
Yes.
still, I mean, now it's memorialized, the square is memorialized, and we pass through every day on the way to school. And so we're actually constantly like we're in such close proximity to the trauma and grief as well.
Yeah.
And so she has a deep understanding from a very young age of, and it was a lot of conversations of like, why did that police officer do that?
Yeah.
What but why? Lots of why questions. And I think for parents, the real learning, especially those of us local and really close to everything that's happened and continues to happen, is around regulating ourselves enough to stay in those conversations when we sometimes don't have answers or when our
Mm.
rage, right? When we have deep, white hot rage about what's going on and, being honest with our kids while also like holding the complexity of it all and bringing them along and showing them what's happening. So
Yeah.
I wanted to name that like we feel it every day. And I think the broader political conversation of, Kamala and the excitement of what that could look like. I mean, when Biden won, we actually had a party on our front lawn. We put music up, like our block is so connected with one another, I think because of
Yes.
our city literally burning and we've just developed close bonds. And I think that to me gets us through these times of like we can celebrate together in the street and know that what's coming is something to, yeah, really cherish. And be under no illusions that like anything could happen, right? So
Anything could happen.
yeah.
Yes. I'm so glad that you expressed that. I don't know if since the tragic murder of George Floyd, I have been in conversation with someone that was from the immediate area to hear of how the local community is healing and still continuing to very visibly have to be recalled of what happened and what that may have, done to strengthen the bond, as you just talked about, and the connectivity. And so, I hate that it had to be such a tragic situation for not only the people of that community, but just all over, to really feel a sense of deepening their compassion and wanting to do something. But it is true that crisis is something that brings us together. And so I appreciate being able to take a moment just to hear you express what you're seeing as someone that's local in that community, now that we are years removed from what's still very vivid into our minds. And so I just wanted to hold space for that. Okay, let's talk about belonging, because I know that that is a big part of your praxis and a part of how you like to show up to this work, as I mentioned in your bio. So, how do you define belonging, and what can leaders do to foster belonging in their teams?
Hmm. Yeah, to me, belonging is so much about trust and authenticity, and where folks on a team can show up with their flaws and imperfections, with a high level of trust and accountability, recognizing like, hey, if I say something that makes us uncomfortable, I'm not going to be like excluded from the group, right? So when I think about belonging, I think about the opposite, which is exclusion. And often I think about a high school cafeteria. Like it's not that different. And so we have to actively interrupt these notions of sort of centering white comfort, centering dominant culture, white supremacy norms within the workplace, knowing like belonging is not the default. And in fact, we need to interrupt these norms to create cultures of belonging. um, I am mixed race. This is something I didn't mention at the top of our conversation, but folks often ask me like, "What are you?" What I don't get it. What's going on with you? And
Human.
so
That's what I am. I'm human.
exactly, exactly. So I belonging has been such a core element of my life. Growing up in the white suburbs of Minnesota, my father is Egyptian. He immigrated to the U.S. from Cairo in the 70s, and my mother is white. And so growing up cross-culturally, interracial family, especially around the time of 9/11, our family was really experienced a lot of just fear, xenophobia, and I had friends who like didn't want to come over and play because they were afraid of my dad calling him a terrorist. And
Mm,
so
mm,
the layers of tragedy around 9/11, of course, like awful, right? A lot of fear, and the impact that that had on my family is something that I think a lot about in the work that I do. That really drives my why. Is feeling the pain of exclusion, especially seeing my father and brother really experience it with racial profiling and getting pulled aside at the airport and getting searched. And yeah, so a lot of that really is what drives me with belonging. And so
yeah.
there's a lot leaders can do, but I want to pause there to just,
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your personal story and giving us some insight into your intersecting identities and how that shapes how you show up to this work. I do believe that stories connects us, and it gives us an opportunity to deepen our understanding of others' experiences. So you said that belonging is not the default, and I just want to amplify that, because there are some individuals who are of the persuasion that these things just happen organically. And can it? Yes. But are we optimizing on the potential of it really reaching its optimization by waiting for the default just to kind of happen? And I think that there's something to be said for placing greater emphasis on the intentionality of it, right? And without that level of intentionality, we're missing so many opportunities to deepen someone's sense of validation and acceptance. And what I liked about what you shared, Rochelle, is that sometimes when we think about belonging, we see it or view it as something that is this really daunting task or exercise that may not be attainable. But what I want this community to know, and what I want us to start advocating for even more intentionally, is that sometimes it's just the everyday small acts. Bringing someone a cup of coffee when you know their day is so busy they can't even break away for a bio break or whatever the case may be. Being able to make sure that maybe your male colleague who is a new father is fully aware of the paternal leave that sometimes I know organizations may implement and add to because things are evolving and changing, of course. I mean, small things. And I just want to name that because it's something that every single one of us can lean into, and it does not require us to have a title, does not require us to have any type of accolades. It just requires us to be human and to value humanity. So I wanted to bring that to the conversation. Now, let's go a little bit deeper into what it looks like in practice beyond some of those simple ideas that I brought up. What are some of the ways in which leaders can help model and can help facilitate a stronger commitment to belonging within the workplace, especially as it relates to building that trust and that connectivity?
Yeah, a story again comes up for me around this, around cultural taxation. And so this is something that happens so often in the workplace. And my background is primarily in impact-driven work, teams that
Mhm.
really care deeply about social issues. And often a lot of those spaces are majority white. And so one way of building belonging is advocating for folks on your team that may be experiencing that cultural taxation by being asked to do things that are above and beyond their job descriptions. And so this happened in two organizations I've worked for, where I had Spanish speaking staff on my team, bilingual, and they were asked by a different department, not my, I was their direct supervisor, but they were asked by either marketing, communications, or a different department to translate materials, extensive work, hours of work to translate materials into Spanish. Well, there's great intention there, right? Like, yes, let's be culturally responsive. Let's translate our materials to reach, right, to reach our audiences. I'm all for that. But who are you asking and who are you placing the burden on without additional compensation, without talking
Yes,
to me, without shifting priorities so they actually have time and space to do it thoughtfully
right.
and joyfully? And so the first time this happened, I was a new supervisor and thought, okay, like, seems like it's fine. She was translating a lot of content. And I just sort of went with it, but was like, this doesn't feel right. I don't know. And the second time this happened, I was much further along in my career and had been a supervisor for a long time and went to the powers that be. I was on the executive team, but I went and talked to HR, like, listen, this already happened. Um, and we need to correct this. So let's compensate this person for the time they spent above and beyond their job description that put them, in fact, at a huge level of stress. Let's compensate them for this. And they
Yes.
did. They did. They made it right. And they added that amount to their paycheck. We calculated the number of hours I worked with my employee. Like, how many hours did you spend on this? What was it taking away
Mm,
from in your other responsibilities? So that's a really simple way. And you know what? HR could have said no. And I would have found other ways to really recognize her work. But it's a
mm,
matter of asking and using your influence to really provide what folks deserve in the work they're doing and seeing
yeah.
where it's happening. Folks getting asked to do things, especially folks of color, to be on
Yes.
committees or to run
Yes.
ERGs. Like, what does that mean? How much time will that take? And how can we support those folks?
Yeah, cultural taxation is real. It happens so often across many different organizations. And again, to your point, often it's because people are just unaware of the consequences and the harm behind it. So it takes being a part of these types of conversations for people to really learn and understand that because it's also exploitation. There's so many different things that I could say that's wrong with that scenario. But I commend you for advocating for that particular employee, and we need more of that. We need more of that. Now, I want to stay here, but I want to ask the same question, but I would like for you to approach it from this distributed workforce that we are seeing ourselves deeply in, although there's lots of organizations that are really pushing the RTO, return to office. But when you think about building trust and connections, because belonging is very important, what are the strategies? How do they differ when it's a virtual, a hybrid type of situation?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind with this is our tendency to respond with heightened emotion in written form. So what I mean by this, I mean, working virtually, we are dependent on the ways in which we show up in writing most of the time. And so before you write that email, if you're a little bit like peeved about something, like take a minute, go on a walk, like, pick up the phone. Zoom fatigue is real. So many of us are
Yes.
over like, are there ways where we can recognize and remember that we're humans in bodies and that we can connect in other ways? Sometimes we need to be at
Mhm.
the screen looking at documents, or if it's a more technical conversation, but where are the opportunities to loosen our grip on the need for this high tech way of connecting? Pick up the
Mhm.
phone. Yeah, find other ways. Send a voice memo. I know on Slack you can do that, where instead of a long typed out thing where it can be misinterpreted, there's a lot of cultural differences, right, happening. We're missing each other constantly with just tone and all of us are I think in the virtual space like inundated with the news, social media, responsibilities with our kids, our families. There's just so much coming at us all the time. So where can we take a breath, slow down, and really just think before sending that email?
Mhm.
What is it you
Mhm.
need? What is an unmet need right now for you? Take some time yourself to identify that unmet need and think through like what might bring us to resolution or solution in a way that's really cooperative. And hopefully there's some humor and playfulness because you've been able to diffuse kind of your own
Yeah.
emotional response. I've worked remote for 16 years, and I think the thing I've just found that works best is let's talk, let's address something quickly, let's have the skills to do it thoughtfully, and let's practice this. We're not perfect, but
Mm,
create a
I
norm.
agree.
Hey,
Yeah, yeah,
I just
those
do what
frequent
that.
high touch check-ins and connections are really critical because sometimes we know the saying out of sight, out of mind, but we have to be even more vigilant when we are in distributed hybrid remote kind of work environments. And so the belonging practice is still equally, if not more so, important in those environments. I do want to amplify that. Now, part of your messaging platform and a lot of what you talk about in your work is shifting teams from conflict avoidance to embracing what you refer to as conflict curiosity. Unpack that for us, Rochelle.
Yes. Yeah, this has been a really fun play on words for me because when I've seen this done well, going from conflict avoidance to conflict curious, often it involves mindfulness, true mindfulness. So either I've done this or seen leaders do this where they will literally in the middle of a conversation or a meeting, they will pause. They will just make space for the pause.
Um,
And I'll see something shift either in myself or a leader working with a team into a curious disposition, right? So rather than moving quickly if something's uncomfortable or needing to sort of patch it up and make it perfect or be defensive if there's like they're feeling threatened, conflict curiosity to me allows for opportunity for restoration. And so the chapter I wrote in Racial Justice at Work is called Accountability Through Restorative Dialogue. So there are models that people practice and are skilled in in having conversations rooted in curiosity, making space for different opinions. It's really hard in the world we live in now with such polarization, but to slow down enough, use these tools and mindfulness and these restorative dialogue models to ask really simple questions. It's not complicated. That's the beauty of this. It's really not. It's saying, "Oh, I noticed, you know, I'm let's pause here or let's stay with this for a moment. I noticed such and such. Maybe there's a different opinion here. Can you say more about that?" Or,
Hmm.
something's not sitting right with me right now. Like, can we take a minute with this?"
Yeah.
And just like trust your team to be grown-ups, to be able to unpack something in real time. And maybe that's not the time, but the curiosity is what I just feel so like my whole nervous system just settles when I work with folks who are curious as opposed to defensive or avoidant.
Yeah, curiosity is so critical. It is one of our core values at NWC, and I think it's a great skill set, an attribute for inclusive leaders to try to grow in. We have to seek to understand first before we assume, before we react, and before we try to even solve. Right? Do we have all of the data to be able to even weigh in on this? So that requires kind of being lifelong learners and intentionally, in search of those opportunities to deepen your knowledge and grow your skill sets around that. And I love the emphasis of the power of the pause. There is great value in those moments of silence. And often, if I'm facilitating, I will say, silence is not a bad thing. Let's lean into this, right? Let's be comfortable with the silence right now because hopefully it means that you all are processing. And there's something to be said for, I don't think that we are intentional about upskilling people around how to do that effectively. And so, when we say leaders trust your teams, I think where the trust comes in is really after we have equipped them to be able to have these tough conversations where we're not just jumping to conclusions, we're asking thoughtful questions to learn so that we can respond and not react. There's a difference between the two. But I love that you have coined a phrase for it, conflict curiosity. And let's face it, so many of us do not have an appetite for conflict, right? And so as we talk about conflict avoidance, it just helps us to lean into the importance of let's not be afraid of conflict. Healthy conflict is absolutely necessary. And it's part of how we grow. It's part of how we stretch ourselves. It's part of how we are able to capitalize on great problem solving ability and collaboration. So I love that that's part of your messaging strategy. Now, you referenced your chapter in the book, and I just want to give a little bit of context. We did place, by the way, into the chat a link to the book, Racial Justice at Work. And you said chapter because those in our community are very familiar with the Winters Group. We've had both Mary Frances and Marisha on at two separate times. They're friends of NWC. We love the fact that they are one of the OGs from an organizational perspective in this space. And Mary Frances has multiple books out, but in recent years, she extended the generous invitation for others on her team to also write chapters of a book that was collectively authored by multiple individuals. And so your chapter is one that I want to go to next. Tell us a bit more about your chapter and what really were some of the themes that you would love to socialize with this community about.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I want to say before I dive into the chapter, just what an honor it is to be featured in the book and alongside Mary Frances and the folks that have all contributed in the book. So
Yeah.
if you haven't gotten a copy,
Yep.
highly recommend. It's so practical, and that's I think what really sets it apart. So for my chapter, I just begin with really explaining how conflict can be generative when it's done with a spirit of, you know, the spirit of generosity of spirit, right? I'm saying spirit so many times, but like it's so much about your own ability to hold and soothe yourself in the midst of difficult
Yeah.
conversations and recognizing whose comfort are we centering, especially when we're having difficult conversations across lines of race and difference. Um, and so I share a few models that have been helpful for me that I've actually practiced and used throughout my career One is called Open the Front Door, and it's an easy acronym to remember that talks about it's sort of rooted in nonviolent communication. So starting
Mhm.
O is observe, like just name what you've observed in whatever's happened. So I noticed, for example, my colleague keeps getting interrupted. That's the observation that everyone can agree
Yeah.
on. Then T is what you think of that. So, I
Mhm.
think that we could get a lot further in our conversation if everyone is given the chance to share. And that's T. OTF. And then F is how you feel about it. And this is strategic in nonviolent communication as well. Those of you that are familiar with it, rather than leading with the emotion, you bring that in after you've observed what's happening. And so then the feeling comes in. I'm feeling frustrated about this, if I'm honest. Like, I'd really like for all of us to have a chance to share. And then after that is D, what is your desire? What is your desired outcome? And with conflict resolution, so often we're unclear about our unmet needs. So we go in fighting, not really knowing what we need from the situation to feel resolution. And often there isn't resolution, and sometimes there is, but like do that work to get clear. What do you desire as a result of this conversation so that the other party or parties can make an informed choice for their part in the conversation or in the issue. So OTFD is a really helpful framework especially when you're nervous, like nervous and oh my God, how's the person going to take this? Like what's going to happen? You can come back to a simple framework. Here's what I'm seeing, what I think about it, how I'm feeling, and what I need.
Mhm.
So simple and so
It
effective.
is. It is, and I love the practicality of it. And sometimes I think that that is exactly what we need, just practical tools in our toolbox to be able to pull them out in the moment of need. And so open the front door. Again, the book is Racial Justice at Work, and we have placed a link into the chat. I also think that when we are considering conflict, we have to make sure that the mindset is to restore a restorative mindset as we're going into it. That is critical because without that, we are probably entering those delicate conversations with a lot of resentment and aggression. And when aggression meets aggression, the conversation ends. It's not productive. And the whole goal is to be able to engage productively to reach that resolution, as you mentioned. And I also love, Rochelle, that you said there may not be a resolution. Maybe the magic that could occur, though, is greater understanding and clarity. And sometimes, clarity is kind. We hear that. But sometimes that's really what we're seeking. I just want to be understood, right? I just want to be understood. Even at the end of the day, we still are just agreeing to disagree. I want to be understood. And I think that's really key. Okay, so I just want to give this audience a little bit of heads up that we're going to be shifting momentarily to take maybe your questions and your comments if you're part of our Zoom community. You can join the conversation by using the raise hand feature that lets me know that you're willing to be called upon. I'll invite you to unmute yourself, and if your camera is on, I'll add you to the spotlight. If you're just here in a listening capacity, but maybe you do have some curiosities that are percolating, place those into the chat. We'll take those questions and we'll acknowledge your comments. If you're on LinkedIn Live and that's how you're catching today's episode, then go to the comment section. Our team is watching that carefully and we're bringing that over into our Zoom community so that we all can be connected. So I'll give you a moment to percolate on that while I go to the next question. Burnout. I want to talk about burnout and well-being because if I had to rate, the top challenges as I'm working with so many different, clients and organizations across many different sectors, the one challenge that is repetitive is this strong sense of an overwork culture that's leading to burnout. And sometimes I even wonder, are we at the point of no return? Because it feels like we've been so conditioned to that type of culture and environment that is hard to even imagine being able to turn that around. So from your vantage point, first, are you seeing the same? And then if you are, I would love for you to talk about some of the effective ways that maybe you help coach teams around to recover from burnout and to achieve well-being.
Yeah. I am seeing the same constantly everywhere. My niche or my focus is really on teams that are driven from a deep sense of purpose and social impact. And so I developed the reset because I think that we are less effective when we're burnt out, honestly. And I
Of
think,
course we are.
yeah, and
Mhm.
the folks that we are promising to support and the work we're doing in the world might even be having the reverse impact. Like we might be, I think often we are making things worse for ourselves and each other when we are so depleted and working from a place of perfectionism, burnout, of urgency, overriding the body, overriding all of our deeper instincts and our inner knowing. And so the work I'm doing with teams is really bringing together mindfulness, embodiment, and continuing to be grounded into a deep sense of purpose. And so the reset framework that I've developed, I think, is really helpful in that sense. And so it's an acronym. I love my acronyms. It's very simple.
Mhm.
And so the R is reflect, right? So the reset, right? R is reflect. Where can we spend time just like slowing down and asking one of the most powerful questions that I ask with teams is, how might we be out of alignment with our values right now? And just holding space to hear, right? Different folks are going to have different responses to that question, depending on their experience in the organization. So where are we out of alignment? Let's do some reflecting. And then embodiment. Let's actually like slow down, feel into the somatic awareness of what's going on for us and do some guided meditation. It's really simple, but tapping into our inner wise guide. This is adapted from Dr. James Gordon at the Center for Mind Body Medicine. It's like people come away with such amazing revelations of like, wow, this really simple thing I've been ignoring for months or years is front and center, and I'm faced with it. And now I have this clarity. And so it's, you have to slow down first to get that clarity,
Mhm.
often through guided facilitation, right? Sort of the midwifery process almost,
Yes.
or coming to some awareness. And then the S is strategize. From there, we can, right, start to strategize around what do we need to do differently, both individually and as a team. Experiment is the next one. So where can we start to experiment with and have a sense of play, like playfulness and psychological safety? We're going to try things, we might mess up and we'll try again, but that's experimentation, a culture of learning. And the T, I'm still playing with the T, but it's tending, it's trust. I'm still thinking through what I want to really ground it in. Another one I have is tether. So like the first two, the R and E, tend to be like in the heart space. Reflecting and embodiment are my healers and my feelers. Like, let's just reflect and embody and hang out here. But if we only hang out here, we're not really strategizing and experimenting. So then my strategize and experiment folks are my movers and shakers. They're like, let's scale, let's have huge impact. And so T, I'm playing with this idea of tether. How can we tether the head and the heart? How can we really bring these together in the work we're doing, not ignoring our bodies and our spirits, and also making sure we're moving with clarity, strategy, and a deep sense of purpose. So I'm still working out the details of it, but so far that's what I'm thinking for the framework, which can be helpful.
I love a good simple framework with an acronym. It makes it easy for us to remember. I did place that into the chat and I put all the T's there while you're still working through them because I think they're all are incredibly valid. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. But yeah, the burnout culture is real. So we do need to make sure we are putting some practices in play so that we can help navigate the complexity of really, and even the stress and the health issues that can come from burnout. It truly is real. So I'm not seeing any hands right now, but I want to continue to forge ahead because I have lots more questions, and I see our time is winding down. But I'm going to try to get to as many additional questions as I can. So let's talk about power dynamics in the workplace, and particularly within like a team structure. In considering how leaders should navigate power dynamics, what are some of the strategies that you often suggest to promote inclusivity and equity?
I think again, it's remarkably simple, but often it's just naming the power dynamics in the room. Like for
Yes.
a leader to say, you know what, I recognize I am in a position of leadership here. There may be things I'm not seeing. I want to know from you all, like what am I missing? And not just I've heard folks say like open door policy, come to me anytime with anything. But that's not enough, right? The open door
Yeah,
policy doesn't actually create the grounds for a conversation that is leveling those power
yeah,
dynamics. It's putting the onus on the employee to muster the courage to bring
right.
something to the leader when those power dynamics are so often imbalanced.
Hmm.
And not just, I mean, there's identity-based power dynamics, there's positionality.
Right.
So it's really, instead of the open door policy, it's like finding ways to tap into your team's needs, and not just through like surveys, because I know that folks also can be surveyed to death and then
See,
nothing
yeah,
changes. So like, don't do that. Like, don't survey your team if you're not going to make, if you're not invested in making changes. uh,
100%.
yeah, finding ways to have constructive dialogue, and naming the power dynamics can put folks at ease. Like, okay, they get it. This leader understands. They don't know everything. There's things I may or may not share, but at least they're sort of disarming the conversation by naming the power dynamic.
Naming is so critical, and sometimes people think, well, if we name it, we can't do anything about it. It is what it is. But that acknowledgement helps people to feel a greater sense of safety and engaging, because at least it gives them the ability to know that that is, that is not, you're not unaware of how that could be impacting the way in which people are showing up to those conversations. And I think that is so critical. So name it, acknowledge it. That is really important. So human-centered approach. We're in this digital age, and it makes it even harder, right, for us to lean into this human-centered approach. But how can leaders maintain a level of sensitivity to the necessity of a human-centered approach, and to cultivate that?
Yeah, I mean, a human-centered approach to me means that I'm modeling this in the way I talk about myself or my own work. So deep self-compassion, fierce self-compassion, I think will translate into how you treat your teams. And so,
Mm,
um, when I'm with leaders, when I've worked with leaders in the past, or even myself, when I'm in a place of like extreme self criticism or
mhm,
holding myself to impossible standards, it kind of makes those around me miserable. It's not fun to
mm,
be around. Um, and I think there's a difference between like standards of excellence and impossible standards that we're constantly
yes.
grinding toward, that can we can never quite get there, and there's never really a moment of just celebrating or slowing down and acknowledging folks contributions. um so human centered is so much about self-compassion, but also like acknowledging the work your team is doing publicly, often, liberally, just allowing for moments of gratitude and praise for the team, not in a way that's like cheesy or like forcing it. Some days you may not be feeling it, and that's fine. But creating opportunity and space to just like support one another, encourage one another, because this work is really hard.
It's really hard. So, Rochelle, I also share with this community that I show up every Friday, looking to learn from our guest co-hosts, and I am always very grateful when those moments of clarity occur. And you said something a moment ago that I took note of. You said that impossible standards are not the same as standards of excellence. And I don't know if I've ever heard someone articulate that how in which you lean into a human centered approach is very much about how in which you see yourself, what you allow for yourself, what you tolerate for yourself, right? And the connection point to others feeling like they can also show up human is really resonating with me. So I just wanted to name that. We have to, as leaders, make sure that we're very aware of how our habits, our decisions, are causing others to view their own decisions and how they're showing up and how they are behaving. So being kind to ourselves is so. It's just such a point that I needed to amplify. So thank you for that. I am taking that to heart. Um, this brings me to my next question, and it is about compassionate leadership, which is also very much a part of how you like to show up to this work. So, what does it look like in practice, and how can leaders become upskilled in their compassionate leadership?
Yeah, I think compassionate leadership gets a bad rep. I think that
Mhm.
often folks think, it's like just needing to be a total softie all the time.
Right, right. Coddling folks all the time, excusing their, maybe toxic behavior. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and really to me, it's the opposite. It's being
Mhm.
fiercely clear about what is okay and not okay in a
Yeah.
given context. And in fact, takes work and takes a lot of self-resourcing. Again, it comes back to self. It always
Yeah.
starts with self. Do I have regard and compassion for my own experience in any given situation?
Mhm.
Um, and am I cultivating a daily practice outside of work, in the way I talk to myself, in my mental hygiene? Like, what am I taking in on a daily basis that's informing my worldview, um, and my biases and all of those things? So how am I showing compassion to myself, giving grace when I mess up? If I say something, in the context of DEIJ too, like if I say something racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, ableist, if there are things that I'm doing, which by the way is inevitable, that we will mess up, that is the
Oh,
reality and
yeah.
the nature of this work. Do I have the capability to name it, notice it within myself, pause, recognize the emotion that's coming up, and be resourced enough to move through the shame and the grief or whatever is happening, embarrassment, make it right, apologize, do whatever you need to do, change your behavior and move on, right? Move on with your work. And so I think the same thing goes for leaders and their teams. When teams see leaders modeling that behavior, it makes a huge difference in how teams, I think, see each other and themselves to say, oh, it's okay to mess up. It's okay to, and we hold each other lovingly accountable. That's how we do things around here. And so I think modeling, it really comes down to the leader themselves modeling it, and also in a really loving spirit, calling in, right, and naming when something
Yeah,
maybe caused harm or needs to be shifted.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Otherwise, it sends a message that we tolerate that it's okay. And so we have to be able to name that. I love the language of mental hygiene. What are your mental hygiene practices? Yeah, it's really, really critical. So I want to go back a little bit to this burnout overwork culture that we know is happening across so many organizations right now. What I hear as part of the concern and being very radical in addressing the burnout and the overwork culture from a lot of leaders is that we don't want to lose performance, we don't want to lose productivity, and so how can organizations balance productivity and well-being and redefine, reimagine success?
Oh, I I
Can
un
they?
I understand the fear, and we know now there have been so many studies where organizations, forward-thinking organizations on the front lines of innovation have tried out the 4-day work week and have come
Yep,
back with data
yep.
and have said, "Oh my God, we're more productive. We are more
Yes.
we are more productive with a 4-day work week. Here's the data." And we had an outside, evaluation done. And
Yes.
here are the impacts on on our work, on our morale. I mean, the benefits are unending, but
People don't
I
wanna believe the
like
data.
look at the data. It exists, and so and you know what? I actually put out a survey to my network because I really wanted to get clear, like, what are you struggling with when it comes to burnout? Is this a solvable problem? And I had one former colleague who shared in the evaluation, my organization adopted the 4-day work week. And I have to tell you, like, I really feel like I've achieved work-life balance. He's a parent of 2 young kids, working as a leader in the climate justice space. I mean, there is no shortage of work for our climate justice friends. And to hear that from someone in the throes of social justice work to say, you know what, we've adopted this 4-day work week. We tried it. our team is actually thriving. Like we're actually thriving. We're doing well in our work. Like we're pushing, we are resourced to keep doing this work and keep fighting for justice because
Yeah.
we're taking care of ourselves and our families. And we know it's important at the end of the day, right? To be resourced. So I gotta tell you, like, yes, there's fear about losing productivity, and the data is clear. The data is clear that you
Yeah.
won't. In fact, you'll be more productive.
Yeah, the data is clear, but it's so hard for many people to lean into that and to believe the data, for whatever reasons. But I love the idea of just forcing dialogue around, is this solvable? How might we solve this? Let's at least explore and engage in thoughts to help us fully assess the intensity of which this could be impacting our overall performance as an organization. So you've had a lot of global experience, Rochelle. I would love for you to touch on your global experience and how that has maybe influenced your approach to this work and your leadership.
Yes, thank you. I moved to South Korea after graduating from college during the recession. This was in 2009, I think. Yeah, 29 to 2010. I lived in South Korea teaching English and um, used any time I had to. I noticed very quickly that the sort of foreigners, the expat teachers, had a really bad rap because we'd come in and it's sort of like Disneyland for folks right out of college, like, oh my God, my apartment is paid for and I get to just do whatever I want. And there was a lot of harm caused, I think, by these like oftentimes Western white foreign teachers. And so I noticed that immediately and was like, I don't want to be like them. So I distanced myself from them
Yeah.
and only did homestays with Korean families and did a deep cultural immersion. But then I kind of missed like folks that sort of understood my Western context. And so I found a middle ground. I tend to do this pendulum thing. And so what it taught me is like, yes, and, right? Like find ways that you can have enriching experiences and cross-culturally rich experiences where you're sensitive to the local culture but not abandoning yourself. And so that was huge. And growing up cross-culturally, I traveled to Egypt to visit family. Had the privilege of doing that. My entire
Mm,
side of my dad's family lives in Egypt still, and so studied abroad there, spent time in Egypt, spent time in Palestine, in Israel, and Jordan, Turkey. So had the
um,
opportunity too to hear the director of our program. And I'm going to go here for a minute. I know we're at the end of our time, but it does relate in terms of what's happening right in Gaza. That
mm,
hearing from both Israeli and Palestinian students, like our program was really intentional to take us on these tours to talk with
yeah,
folks and to say, like, how arrogant that you think you know, right? That you think you know the
yeah,
solution is so simple. It's not. This is such a long history of horror in the region, and so it's been really intense and heartbreaking right
mhm,
now in the news,
right,
and the rhetoric and so that shapes a lot of what I bring as well.
sure,
Like there's a lot of arrogance, I think, in this conversation, and it's so much more nuanced. And I think we
yeah.
can hold the complexity. Um, I think we can do that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can too. And that sounds like a challenge and a call to action to us. And I appreciate that. Thank you for going there, Rochelle, because it is very heartbreaking. And I appreciate your willingness to touch on what your experience has been in that regard. So we are running out of time, but I do not want us to close out without giving you a chance to share with this community a webinar that you have coming up in November. So tell us a little bit about what that entails. We did place the link into the chat, but what do folks have to look forward to with this webinar?
Thank you. Yes. So, with my colleague, Jillian Gross-Fortgang, we are co-facilitating a webinar on November 11th about just how to have difficult conversations, especially
Mm.
around not only the election and the results of that, but also the holidays and being with family, how to stay true to yourself. How can you stay true
Yeah,
to yourself in difficult conversations, especially with folks you may not agree with? And we'll bring in practices around mindfulness and embodiment. So we'll actually do the guided meditation I mentioned around tapping into your intuition and your wise guide. It's another acronym: notice, pause, reflect, and choose. And so we'll bring that in and show you those tools and how to use them, do some journaling and reflection. So really it's just to resource you and support you as you go into a pretty contentious time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of individuals are definitely speculating that we probably all should be very vigilant about how in which we are conducting ourselves, and just being very aware of our surroundings. So it's really important. To connect with Rochelle, we have placed her LinkedIn information into the chat. I hope that you will get her book, Racial Justice at Work. I hope that you also will take advantage of the free webinar opportunity coming up November the 11th. And we are just so grateful that you have shared with us so generously today. And we appreciate hearing and learning from you. Wishing you all a safe weekend, and vote, 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 vote if you haven't already. And we look forward to seeing you next week for another episode of Intentional Conversations, where we intersect dialogue of DEI with leadership and business. Thank you. Take good care.
Thank you.